Welcome to episode 157 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriters Barry Wernick and James Hallam. They just completed a film called Bad Kids at Crestview Academy, which is actually the second installment in a franchise that they're starting to build. So it's a really interesting interview. They talk about the original film and now they're talking about this sequel. So stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 157. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. A quick few words about what I'm working on. So once again, the main thing I'm working on is post-production on my crime action thriller film, The Pinch. I did get another cut of the film done, so I'm now reviewing that. I'm very close to locking picture, but I'm thinking I might need a day or so of some inserts where I'm just going to run around and get a couple of shots that we still need. So it might take a while to get that all figured out, but slowly but surely I am moving the project forward. I thought it would take a minute and run through the various optioned scripts that I have out. I think last year I did this at the end of the year, just as kind of a roundup, but I got very busy the last couple of weeks of this year, so I thought this might be a good time to do it. I talk about the options as they happen on the podcast, but I never really go back to them if they expire. And as you're going to see with my recap, most of the options do end up expiring. When I first started doing the podcast, I debated about whether I should even mention the options on the podcast because, as I said, most of them do end up expiring before, the producer actually takes the option and purchases a script and produces the movie. So I kind of was thinking, why even bother mentioning them since most of them aren't going to go anywhere. But ultimately, I decided that it was important for people to understand that getting a script option is just one step along the road to getting an actual produced credit. And really, you need to get many, many option scripts before one of them will probably result in a produced credit. This was a bittersweet lesson that I learned. And again, this is kind of why I think it's important to be transparent about this process on the podcast. It was a really bittersweet lesson that I learned early in my writing career. The first screenplay I ever optioned, it actually did get produced, and it got sold, it got produced. And so I thought that that's sort of how it worked. You write a script, you option a script, it gets produced. But then after a few years after this first option, I continued to option more scripts. And after many, many, many more options and no more produced credits, it started to dawn on me just how lucky I was with that first script. And again, the lesson is it's going to take probably several, maybe a half dozen, maybe a dozen option scripts before one of them actually turns into a produced credit. So here's a quick recap. I haven't done a lot of options this year, mainly because most of my time has been focused on The Pinch. I haven't written a lot of new stuff, and therefore I haven't done a lot of email and fax blasts for myself, and that's usually how I get most of these options. So as I said, this year has really been devoted to The Pinch, not so much in writing new scripts. So anyway, if you've been listening to my podcast over the years, hopefully some of this will kind of jog your memory. As I said, I've talked about these scripts as I've optioned them, so hopefully kind of you'll remember. It's just, I will randomly, as the options come on, I will mention them on the podcast as I get an option. And now, as I said, I'm just going to recap sort of what's happened with some of those scripts. So I have a horror comedy script. I've talked about this script numerous times over the last couple of years. I've optioned it several times. I think probably about a year and a half ago, I optioned it to an Indian producer, and it was a kind of a strange deal. He only wanted the Hindi rights. So basically he was planning on producing this movie in India and only distributing it in India. So he said, listen, let me option those rights from you, and you can still go out and try and option the other rights to another producer. And sure enough, I did find another producer that was willing to just basically take all the rights except for India. And that option, I think I did it about 6 months ago, and that is expired. I think it expired in November or December, so that option is up. The Indian producer, his option expires in the next couple of weeks. I think in the middle of January, his option will expire. I haven't heard from him in well over a year, so I would say that's probably done with. I doubt he's doing much with the script at this point. My baseball comedy, again, another script I've talked about numerous times over the years on the podcast. That option has now kind of run its course as well. The official option expired in December, and the producer called me and said he just didn't want to pay any more money to extend it, but he did want to kind of keep working on it and at least keep it on the back burner. He had a couple more leads, and when I say leads, he basically is just the key is raising the money. So he has a couple more sort of angles that he's trying to play out on raising the money, and he's a super nice guy. I really like him. I think he'll do a great job with the project. And so I basically said, well, listen, I won't, aggressively send it out. And if I do find another producer, I will let you know. So there's no official option there, but, he's still got a few things he's going to kind of look after. And, if some of those things start to materialize, some of those other leads, if he finds some interest, I'm sure he'll come back to me and get an official option agreement. But for the time being, I would say that's kind of run its course. And, again, I really like the guy, and I think he would have done a great job with the script, but the bottom line is the option is over, and so I can start sending it out again. I have a teen comedy script. Again, I optioned that one. I think it might have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I optioned it originally to this producer. That option expired. I'm not honestly sure when it expired, if it was even this past year or the year before, but that producer is actually still working, much like the baseball comedy I just mentioned. That option expired, and I just sort of said the same thing to him. Listen, I will let you know if I option it, because he still wanted to kind of keep working on it, and he actually has continued to work on it. He's still out there trying to raise money, and last I heard, which was probably maybe a month ago, he actually emailed me and said he was coming to Los Angeles. He's a European producer, so he's not based here in Los Angeles, but he emailed me and said, hey, I'm going to be in LA and I'm still trying to get this together, and he's going to start to do some of the casting for the project. So again, it's very strange that he has not mentioned optioning the script again. Options, they really exist to protect the producer more than the writer. So from a writer's standpoint, from my standpoint, I don't really care if he wants to work on it without a formal option agreement in place. But at this point, I kind of know he's working on it, so I am not sending it out. But it's a little bit strange. In my entire career, I've never seen a producer work this hard on a project when he doesn't actually have an option. And he hasn't even asked for one. It's not even an issue of money. So I'm not sure. It's a little bit odd, frankly. But the bottom line is he still seems to be working on the project, and he's going to come here. I've never actually met him. All of our correspondence has been through email since he is based in Europe, but he's coming to LA in February, so I'll get to meet him and hopefully sit in on some of the casting sessions. So we'll see. We'll see if that materializes. It's a little odd, as I said, for a producer to be continuing on without an option agreement, but if he's comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it. So we'll just see. I have a limited location female protagonist thriller, which I've optioned a few times over the years. That option is still active and will be for another 6 weeks or so. I talked to that producer last August. He was still out there pushing the script forward. The deal I struck with him is quite typical of what I generally do. Basically, I gave him, and this was now 18 months ago, but I gave him a free 6-month option, and then after the 6 months, he had the right to extend the option for another 6 months, but he had to pay $500. So after the first 6 months, and again, this is very, very typical of what I do and very, very typical of what a producer will then try and do. So after the first 6 months, we got on Skype and kind of talked through what he was doing and where he was going to take the project. He didn't really want to pay $500 for the extension, and frankly, that was fine with me. So I just gave him another 6 months for free. And then the same thing happened after another 6 months. Basically, it was the same agreement, so he had to pay $500 for 6 months. Again, we get on Skype. He didn't really want to pay for it, and I said, that's fine. So I gave him another 6 months for free. So basically, he's had the script option for nearly 18 months. Again, all for free. I get this question all the time about option agreements. How much should you try and get from the producer? Should you do free options? And I think this is a good example of kind of how I do things. You can do what you want, but this is kind of how I operate, and I'll just give you my thoughts on it because I think maybe that would give you some insight into how you should approach your own option agreements. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this producer is an experienced producer with numerous IMDb credits. He's got like real movies that he's produced that are listed on IMDb. I would not cut this deal, and the deal that I just described, I would not cut it with an inexperienced producer. If you run into a producer with no credits, it's they might be, again, it's on a case-by-case basis. So I won't say I would never cut it with an experienced producer, but for the most part, if someone doesn't have any experience, it probably, they're going to have a hard time getting a movie made. That first credit is going to be very, very difficult. If someone has a lot of credits, obviously they know how to produce movies. They've done it before. So it's conceivable and probable that they will be able to do it again. So I'm much more sort of lenient with people that have a lot more produced credits. But the way this deal was set up, as I mentioned, at the end of 6 months, he would have to pay me $500, or I could have simply said no thanks and moved on. So that's very, very important. In this case, I did just continue to give him free extensions, but I could have said no. If I didn't think things were progressing and if I didn't like him, then I could have easily said no. I've found with independent producers, they're not going to want to pay the $500 unless they're making some real progress on the project. So while $500 isn't a lot of money, it's enough to make them think long and hard about whether they want to pay it or not. In this case, I liked the producer, and each new 6-month period, he had some new ideas that he wanted to try in order to push the project forward. So, we would get on Skype, we would have a nice call, and he would kind of tell me what happened with the last set of, leads that he was following up on. And again, it's all about just raising money. At this stage of the production, it's just purely raising money. Sometimes you run into situations where, we're trying to get an actor attached or a director attached, but most of the 95% of the work that the producer is doing at this stage is just raising the money, is getting the money in order. So we would get on Skype every 6 months when these options would expire, and he would kind of tell me what happened over the course of the last 6 months, and he would tell me kind of what his plan for the next 6 months were. And again, I liked him as a producer. He was experienced. He had a lot of credits, and so each 6 month period he would come to me with some new ideas, some new potential ways of getting the film financed. So each time it seemed like it was worth taking another roll of the dice with him. He also has some experience in distribution, and we've had a few talks about the pinch, so he's been helpful with a few suggestions on that project as well. And I will be going back to him once the film is done to see if he might be able to help with distribution. Even if he can't help with distribution, I'm sure he will have some ideas about who I could potentially take the project to. There probably are some distributors out there that the pinch would be a good fit for, even if it's not him. And he might know some of them, and he might be able to at least tell me who those companies are, or maybe even introduce me to somebody. So again, it's just, building that relationship. Even if the film, as I said, ultimately, even if the film isn't right for him, I do feel like there will be some value there. If you talk to anyone in the business, they're going to tell you that it's all about relationships. So that's really how I approach these option agreements. It's not really about trying to squeeze money out of the producer for the option. At least for me, it's about seeing if this is someone who I like and want to get to know and possibly work with down the road. If it's someone I like, I'm very casual about how much money I try and get out of them. Again, the $500 is not a big deal. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough to make them think. And at the same token, it's not so much money that's really going to affect me one way or another. So I don't mind just saying, no thanks, or you don't need to pay me the $500 if the producer seems like he's making some progress and has some new angles to pursue. I want to mention one other option, which I think expired in 2015, although it may have expired in 2014, but it's worth talking about here, just as I said, in relation to what I just talked about networking. I have a sort of sexy sci-fi thriller, kind of a Blade Runner, film noir type of a script. Again, I've optioned it several times. I think I've optioned it at least twice since I've been doing the podcast. The first producer that I optioned it to, he ended up optioning some of my other scripts. I have a low-budget horror script he's optioned once or twice, and I think there might even be another script at one point that he optioned to mine. But the bottom line is the first script I optioned to him was this sci-fi thriller script, and he had it for 6 months, and he wasn't able to get it going. But again, I've started to build a relationship with him, optioning some other scripts. He actually ended up helping me quite a bit on the pinch. He was willing to get on the phone pretty much as often as I needed just to talk through some of the producing problems that I ran into when I was producing The Pinch. He has a lot of experience producing, so having someone like that available to me was very, very valuable. And again, this was the same sort of deal that I cut with the other producer that I just mentioned. There was some extensions. I've given him a lot of free options. So I think he just felt like maybe there was a little bit of goodwill. And so for whatever reason, he was willing to just get on the phone. You know, I didn't pay him. It was just purely as a nice thing to do for me. And again, but I've helped him out by giving him some free options on scripts. But again, I'm just trying to sort of show people how these relationships can grow and mature. And as the time has gone on, he's helped me with The Pinch, and we're talking about possibly doing something in the future on another script that I have. So again, this is really all about how the relationships are built. I get a lot of emails from people, and all of these options that I just mentioned have come as a direct result of the email and fax blast service that I use for myself and I sell through SYS Select. I get a lot of emails from people saying, you know, well, how many scripts have been produced or how many scripts have been optioned? And, you know, there definitely have been films produced and there have definitely been scripts sold, and there's definitely been a lot of scripts optioned, and that's all great. But I think that when people ask that question, you know, they're missing a sort of the bigger opportunity that exists is, you know, actually networking and building relationships with people. And sometimes these things can take, you know, months or years or, you know, decades. But that's what you have to do, is you have to get out there and build relationships with people. And this email and fax blast service is one way to do that. Obviously, you hope you option and sell and get your movie produced through something like an email and fax blast. But I think that there also is a lot of opportunities that people don't necessarily think of when they're a newer writer, that can present themselves by doing these types of things. And again, it's not just all about the SYS email and fax blast service. Any of these services, whether it be Inktip or Blacklist, is going to be a lot of the same sort of thing. It's going to be about just getting your script out there, networking with people that have experience, and getting to know those people, because that's kind of where you're going to build a career. Also want to talk about the writing assignments. In the fall of 2015, I talked about 2 writing assignments that I had pretty much back to back. I did one, I think, in September, and then one was sort of October, November, December. And this is of last year. Well, it's now over a year ago. It's January 2017 now as I record this. So this was in you know, the fall of 2015, fall and winter of 2015. So about, you know, 13, 14, 15 months ago. One of them seems to have completely fallen through. I haven't heard from that producer probably in 6 months. And, you know, I wrote the script. He paid me some of the money, and it just hasn't materialized past that. The other producers, you know, I wrote the script for them. They paid me, and they are supposedly in production on that. So that one may still actually turn into a movie. Again, I think it's worth noting, you know, even when a producer hires you as a writer and pays you to write a script, there is still a lot that can go wrong with the project. And a lot of things a lot of good things have to happen for the project to actually make it into production and actually become a produced film. So it just takes a lot of effort to get those produced credits. There's just a ton of things that can go wrong between, you know, the script phase and the production phase. So there's probably a bunch of other options that I've mentioned over the years on the podcast. I would say at this point, all of those have expired. I just went through my list. I have a little board that I write down all my scripts and the options on them. And then once the options expire, I will just erase. I'll write a little date next to them, and then I'll erase it. So as I was just, you know, queuing up this podcast episode, I just looked through that. And I'm sure there's been some other options over the years that I've mentioned. And for whatever reason, those have all expired. So pretty much, I would say that's an up-to-date kind of list of what's going on with my various scripts. So let's go ahead and move into the main segment of the podcast. Today, I'm interviewing writer Barry Wernick and James Hallam. Here is the interview. Welcome, Barry and James, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So
thank you.
So to start out, maybe you can give us a little bit of background on yourself, kind of where did you grow up, how did you get started in the entertainment industry? Barry, why don't you just start out, and then we'll go to James next.
All right. Well, I started out in the entertainment industry as a child actor. I used to act in theater and through repertory theaters, improv troupes, and so on. So I started actually on stage and then in front of the camera doing commercials and TV shows and some movies. After law school, there's a big jump. I then went to New York and continued acting. And what I found out was that a lot of the stuff I was reading, the scripts and things, I was like, well, you know what? I'd like to try it myself. I'd be sitting there tinkering with scripts and putting in my own take on it. And then I really got into writing for myself. And then utilizing my law background to help with private equity raises and raising money for my own projects. And so started with screenplays and got into actually 2006, the writer's strike sort of, well, it put a little bit of became sort of a hindrance in trying to sell a screenplay because no one was taking any pitches. It was a writer's strike. So at that point, figured, we'll turn a screenplay into a comic book because that's not governed by anything. We still own the rights. And basically, that was Bad Kids Go to Hell. Turned that screenplay into a comic book. And then, after the writer's strike, we started pitching, and we realized as a movie, and realized that that really wasn't necessary for us to sell it. I could actually do the set up the production company, do the private equity raise, and actually do a non-studio film, and still retain 100% ownership of the property. And that's actually when I met James, and James, I guess you can continue.
Sure.
James got involved in the entertainment industry as a producer.
Perfect. So James, why don't we take it back a little bit and kind of get your origin story here?
Sure. Yeah. So backing up, basically, my career primarily has been in the distribution side of the business. I've worked for a company that handles buying and selling media for Anheuser-Busch for brands like Bud Light, Michelob Ultra, Budweiser, et cetera, and a lot of these esoteric craft brands. So when I got involved with Barry and Matthew, it was coming in as an investor on the first project, which Barry was talking about, Bad Kids Go to Hell. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, the company and the brand needed some basic architecture to build out the media strategy and the branding strategy across all those platforms we were talking about earlier, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, et cetera, and then have that base built for future opportunities. So I didn't know anything really particularly about screenplays or producing, but I did know a lot about distribution strategy and branding and representing mass marketed brands. So starting to work with Barry and Matthew, I basically just got submerged into that project out at San Diego Comic-Con when we were doing our world premiere. And then as Barry and I sat in our production office, that was spring of 2013, doing the screenplay, writing that out for this next installment, that was a first for me, and I really was leaning on Barry and his expertise to start to understand the creative process around writing screenplays and production and stuff like that. So kind of here we are now after going through this 1.5 times for myself, and Barry's actually been through this quite a bit. He's done other productions besides this franchise. But basically, my side of the table, if you will, is handling the building and execution of all of our marketing strategy on the distribution side, and then handling the sale and all components of that for the distribution and sale of the feature films.
I see. So
yeah, on that.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I was just
going to follow up and just say that on the screenplay portion and how to sell your screenplay. Sometimes, and what we found out in this case, we built a franchise based on this universe of Crestview Academy. Spoiled, rotten private school kids you want to see die, basically. Uh-huh. But sometimes it can become in your best interest not to sell your screenplay. And that's what we found with this particular franchise. It's not always the case. Initially, I was out there with Matthew. We wrote the original screenplay and the original comic book series. And, that was the idea. Write something, pitch it, sell it, move on. And because of that writer's strike, we actually held on to the property, owned the property, never sold it, and didn't have to. We were able to produce and then sell the finished product as a movie as opposed to selling the screenplay. Mm-hmm. So, and, in that case, now we're selling to, getting it out distribution. In this case, Momentum Pictures, so on.
Perfect. So, Barry, can I back it up just a little bit? You mentioned that you turned this original Bad Kids Go to Hell into a comic book. Did you have a background in producing comic books? Were you just a comic book lover, so you kind of knew how comic books worked?
So the whole comic book idea came from a mutual friend of Matthew and mine, David Atchison, who had been writing comic books with Rosario Dawson and well, people, and he suggested during the writer's strike that we turn our movie screenplay into a comic book series. And to be honest, on my side, I was a comic book movie fan, but I wasn't really into comic books other than when I was a kid, superheroes. I loved Captain America, okay? Things like that. But Matthew, on the other hand, was a big comic book nerd. So he was actually hesitant in really pushing the idea with me because he thought that I was going to say, no, this isn't a comic book. There are no capes. There's no, superheroes. What are you talking about? But I think I surprised him when I was like, absolutely, that is so cool. Let's do it. And so we got a lot of help from guys who are in the industry, from colorists and writers and helping us. Like I said, David Atchison, Lee Duhigg, coloring, Antarctic Press, out of San Antonio, that helped us fine-tune our comic book layout, because a lot of a story in a comic book has to do with laying it out properly, where each panel hits, it ends at a certain place on the page before you turn the page, different, just the whole comic book format. And then what you find out is you can actually utilize it, and it helps you if you're directing, or it helps if you hire on. In the case of this movie, Bad Kids of Crestview Academy, we had Ben Browder, who had nothing to do with the comic book series. He does reprise his role as the janitor in the second movie, but he was able to utilize the comic book, Bad Kids Go, the number 2 Hell, which the second movie based off of, and help with storyboarding his own directing to get an idea. It's not always the movie's not always the same as the comic book or the screenplay, for that matter, but it does help give a vision,
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, after everything is said and done, do you feel like doing the comic book really did help you ultimately get the movie made?
I think it helps in a lot of ways. One way it helps the visual, mm-hmm. but the other way it helps is actually getting money to make your movie. Because one thing I've learned is you can send your screenplays out to, let's say you want to sell it. People don't read. People don't read what you're writing. A lot of times they'll read maybe the first couple of pages, or they'll thumb through it to get to page 10, then maybe page 30, and then maybe page 60, and just to get a feel for it. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have a comic book, most people are visual. especially people that are into movies, are visual. They want to see it. And they can visualize what's on paper, on a comic book paper, and visualize that on screen a lot easier than the words. And I'm talking executives, people in studios, they have problems reading. And it helps there, but it also helps with investors. Because if you're looking to raise money, an investor looks at a comic book, and once again, that person also says, oh, this thing, I get it. I can see it. I can see it up on the screen. I can see, whether it's live action, which we shoot, or, if it is something that's animated, you can visualize both of those, even though it's an animated or cartoon format.
Yeah.
So and if I could just bolt on to that question just a smidge, what we've learned in the Comic-Con side or space of our property is there's just a genuine acceptance by the public, whether you're in Portland or New York or right here in Dallas, Texas, and everywhere in between. We go on the Wizard World tour, so we're out on the road quite a bit, and we do these what are called creative panels. We've got one coming up in New Orleans on the 6th of January. Is that the community just really roots for the independent comic book, period. They just love it, and when you get that type of attraction and loyalty, I think it just is more of that snowball effect where you take a little pebble, you start to roll it, and then by the time you get to the investor stage, what Barry's talking about, where no one reads anything, it just helps because you have a warm market, if you will. You've got assets out, and I think it's visually real easy for people to spot and understand. And I feel like that's been, I don't want to say all of it, but it's been, wouldn't you say, Barry, a significant part of our recipe, at least on this franchise, where we are able to call out whether it's Wizard World or San Diego, but basically the fans have helped us along this journey, and it just shows up whether you go out and you look at our Twitter feed or some of our comic book shop partners that have done promotions with us. It just really has been, we've benefited as a result. Do you think that's fair, Barry?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the fans and the comic book store owners who actually go out there, and when they see something independent, it's not Marvel, it's not DC, but it's a new idea. And
right.
And that's something that they want more of, and I think the fans want more of. And not to say that there aren't haters. You're always going to, when you write something, you're always going to have people who you think are your friends really either dissing you behind your back or making you feel a little uncomfortable and insecure about what am I doing? Who do I think I am? To be able to write something and actually go on screen or no. Those doubters, the haters. Well, the comic book industry, the comic book world, the fan base, they're your biggest supporters. Even when they're telling you, oh, you know what? There's a hole here in your story. And this is the great feedback you get at the Comic-Con, is the fans actually tell you what they don't like, what they do like, and give you ideas of maybe you should change it like this, or maybe you should do this or that. And I think it's important to humble yourself too and take that feedback and say, I guess that did suck. Yeah, maybe this guy has a better idea on how to approach a certain, plot device or storyline.
Yeah, so. And one of the things, the way you guys are describing it, is it sounds like you had some success with the comic, and I just wonder if there's any keys to that. Did you somehow bump into somebody along the way that knew how to market the comic book? Because all these things you're talking about, I know nothing about these conventions and all of this, the comic book store owners, these kinds of things. How did you actually make this comic book somewhat successful?
You want me to jump into that, Barry?
No, you can. Sure.
I think it's a combination of two things, maybe three. A good storyline, if you will, and then finding good partners. So Barry and Matthew jumped on the Wizard World and all Comic-Con fanboy convention circuits early on, and we're using that channel, if you will, as leverage against this independent idea called Bad Kids Go to Hell or independent comics. And then along their journey, they bumped into another company called Antarctic Press out of San Antonio, who actually put some real time and investment behind the comic book and allowed them the space to be able to continue to go out and do these Comic-Cons and engage, as Barry was saying, with the fans in the different cities within the communities, but also they would work through Diamond Comics, which is the distributor nationally for all comic book shops, of which Bad Kids Go to Hell and Bad Kids Go #2 Hell is distributed in over 2,500 comic book shops in the United States and Canada and around the world. So I think it was leveraging those three things which kind of made it all come together. But it's very real. Now we've pulled back.
Well, there's one. Yeah, I want to interrupt there. There is that one other component where we took it to another level when we were to get our print run. One of our print runs we did. We actually allowed our fans to take part in a Kickstarter.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, so yeah, that was pretty cool. You do something like that, and you can actually see through these crowdsourcing mechanisms where people like an idea, and you can see, does it work or not? And that was pretty cool to see that fans came and actually put their money up and said, yeah, go do another print run for Bad Kids Go to Hell, the #2 Hell. So
and I might just finish that line of thinking. So I think it was after about 3.5 years with Antarctic, we got to a point to where we negotiated our distribution and publishing rights back, and then erected a company called Bad Kids Press under our Bad Kids LLC, and then that's now morphed into Good and Bad Kids, which this property is on the Bad Kids side. And ultimately what the company does is we'll review all comers, whether your idea is a screenplay or a comic book idea or just some creative. And that's as a result of doing all those creative panels for the last 3 years with the Wizard World circuit. So we have, companies or individuals bring us ideas, and we evaluate them for potential creation or distribution or whatever the ask is. So, but yeah, I would say those 3 and 4 channels.
And then to take that on what James just said is, let's say you have an idea, or it's a screenplay, and you want to turn it into a comic book. Well, that's something that we could do. And what's wonderful about it is you actually get a test market. These are your first adapters, right? You go to Comic-Con, you go to the comic book world, and before you go and raise money and try to make a huge movie, or even a little movie that costs a huge amount of money, right? See if it works. See if it has legs. If people actually like the concept, the idea, and there you have your microcosm of you know what, this one's not going to hit. No one's going to enjoy this. No one cares about it. There's nothing to it. Move on. Another project. Yeah. And you just save yourself a lot of time and a lot of money in making a movie out of something that maybe wouldn't have been a good idea. Yeah. Or on the other hand, hey, this is something that's hit.
So let's
go to the next step.
I might just want to say this one comment, not to give away our secret sauce here, but we've really learned that there's just not an audience for independent creatives to come together to bounce ideas off of each other, whether you're talking about writing anything like that. We've had just an overwhelming success when we do these creative panels and get into these discussions with artists about their projects because they don't have an audience to go and share their ideas with, which is ultimately a publisher's responsibility.
Yeah. Let's dig into Bad Kids of Crestview Academy. Maybe to start out, you can kind of give us a log line or pitch of the movie.
Barry, you want to give a log line?
Log line?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we do have a few. The basis of it all is Daddy's money can't save them now. Give it a little snark. It's funny. It's humorous and hopefully people get it from a log line. This school year, the other one was this school year experience every rich kid's nightmare.
Right.
And I think, what was the other log line we had? Was,
yeah, I'm going through them right now. There's about 6 of them.
Yeah, detention sucks, but it's killer fun.
Yeah, that was one of them.
Maybe we can talk
those
about
would be probably the 3 log lines.
Okay, and maybe we can talk a little bit about your collaboration. I know I have a lot of screenwriters who listen to this that write with a writing partner. Maybe you can just talk about how that actually went. It sounds like you guys were in the same room for a lot of this, but maybe you can talk about how that goes. Do you guys sit there and spitball ideas and then divide up scenes? Do you guys, one person's at the computer, one person is looking over his shoulder? Maybe just describe that collaborative process a little bit.
I think it's different for every writing team, and I'm a big proponent of having a partner who will call you out and say, that's stupid, that's not funny, that's, or the opposite and say, oh, that's really great, let's go with it, let me work on that angle now and then get back to you. But I think having, there are 2 ways to do it, and I've done, or I say 2 ways, the 2 ways I've done it. Matthew and I were usually in different rooms in different, sometimes parts of the world, and we'd write, send it to the next, send it over to the other guy and get a response and just go all the way through it and make corrections, make edits, get it back to me. You've got, so many days to do it, and then I'll get it back to you after my so many days of going through it and sending you back the version. James and I have a much more collaborative, I think, effort, and James can go over that. Why don't you go over how you and I
do it? So basically, we took a spring, if you will, and sat in our production office, put a in-focus machine up on a blank wall, if you will, and then from using the comic book as a narrative, had kind of the rough outline going, etc., started to get these scenes going. And basically, whether it was me taking the lead or Barry taking the lead, we'd talk through each one of the scenes and just say, hey, what do you think here? This was kind of a hold from the last time, and does that fit? And then it would just take on shape from there. And to Barry's point, there were some times where we had to leave it or work independently on something. But for the most part, we sat right there. And I do want to throw Brad in there, one of our co-producers. We actually, after this whole thing was written, we all 3 checked into a hotel room to do that final polish. You remember that, Barry?
Yeah, we did. We went in and read through the whole screenplay before. This is part of pre-production, so before we actually started shooting anything, started going through all the holes. Everything that we saw in there that needed to be fixed, tightened up, and so on. And it was definitely a real collaborative effort, being in the same room and working on it together. The one thing that I guess we didn't mention was, how do you start, though, right? Like you got a blank piece of paper or a cursor blinking on your blank computer screen. And for me, that's always the hardest part. But if I get myself to start off with sort of that, look at each page of the script as a minute into the movie and look at, okay, at this point, well, first I'll know what genre, what's the story about, but be able to put on page just an outline of what happens in the first minute of the movie, what's going to happen, 3 minutes into the movie, 10 minutes into the movie, and so on. Kind of like just look at that point in the movie, 10 minutes, where am I in this movie? Do I know everything that the movie's going to be about? That kind of thing. That's important to have down there just so that you have that structure, and then you can fill in the space between those page numbers. And then that's when the imagination and everything really starts to go wild, because now you've got, 7 pages or so in between 3 and 10 to get to that 10th minute in the movie. And how are you filling that up? Same thing, halfway through the movie. If it's, page 50 or whatever, 45, 60. where do you want to be? Where do you want the audience to be?
So how
that's always the hardest part. I always love to have something already out there on paper. Someone already do those pages along the way, get it to me, and I love to just chop the crap out of things and edit and find funny crap, and it's I'm a lot better at working with something that's you've already got something down on paper. So
yeah. So, no, excellent advice. So how can people see Bad Kids of Crestview Academy? Do you guys know what the release schedule is going to be?
Yes, actually. It's appropriate. We release on Friday, the 13th of January.
Perfect.
And we're releasing in select theaters, 10 major markets in the U.S., as well as, and that's in theaters, and then pretty much everywhere on demand and on digital HD, online, all at once, same time, day and date.
Perfect. And
Friday the 13th.
Yeah, perfect. That's a good release date. So what's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Anything you're comfortable sharing, if you're on Twitter, Facebook, a blog, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, just so people can kind of keep up with what you guys are doing.
Our universe is Crestview-Academy.com. That is everything Crestview is at our official webpage. But, James, let them know on all of our Twitter.
Bad Kids Go to Hell, Bad Kids Crestview Academy, Bad Kids Go #2 Hell. We have basically redirected every type of SEO search you could do to get to our website. As far as on our social platforms, the Twitter and Instagram feeds are called Crestview Bad Kid, at Crestview Bad Kid. Then Facebook and Tumblr are Bad Kids of Crestview Academy. So you can find us out on social all day long, every day. We love social media.
Perfect. Well, guys, I really appreciate your coming on the show and talking with me. Fascinating story you guys have. Good luck with the film.
Thanks, bud.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on your website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, characters, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your projects, this is a great way to do it. We will also write a logline and synopsis for you, and you can add this service to the analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your script gets a recommend from a reader, you get a free email and fax blast to my list of industry contacts. This is the exact same blast service I use myself to promote my own scripts, and it's the same service I sell on the website. It's a great way to get your script into the hands of producers who are looking for material. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing screenwriter and director duo Lisa Robinson and Annie J. Howell. They just did a film called Claire in Motion. We walk through the early days of their career and how they got this film produced. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.